Today's guest is Lyndsey Moore, who is a CT licensed naturopathic doctor and master of acupuncture, who is the owner and director of Soleil Acupuncture and Naturopathic Wellness in Hamden, Connecticut. She collaborates with five other providers in practice, each adding to the dynamic nature of Soleil, which was coined a unique, integrative, and holistic clinic. She works primarily with women and their male partners to improve fertility and conception odds, along with others to optimize their metabolic health and healthy, long lives ahead. So, Lyndsey, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
You're very welcome. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to kind of dive right into kind of what brings you here today. We had a bit of a conversation off air, a lot of it surrounding a lot of the self-awareness you already have. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of money blocks. You mentioned like I know a lot, but I can't seem to like translate that into results and kind of like showing what it is that I know. So just for the sake of context, like why don't you add a little bit to that and kind of tell me where you're at and where I can best support you today.
Sure. So I have done probably various different mindset workshops, reading over the past probably 2.5 years. My business opened in 2020, which was a roadblock in and of itself. But the fact that I was able to traverse that, I felt like I can translate some form of overcoming adversity in general. And when I realized that other people were going to be involved in my business, it was no longer about me and my security. I now had to make sure that I had financial security to both support my business, the infrastructure, and the individuals involved. And through that experience, I was able to understand where some of my roadblocks came from. They're definitely genetically, or not genetically, but inherently derived from my familial background, things that I hear my parents would used to say, and even still to this day, my mom. Um, and then also just the environment of what we hear in the news and whatnot. So I try to avoid all of that kind of noise and sound, but it always gets me to like a certain point. And then for right now, for example, while I try to not be anxious about money, I sometimes like won't look at like a bill or something and just kind of have this anxiety kind of stemming around it. Sometimes I lose sleep before I know a really big payment has to be made. So I'm trying really hard to get away from that, but I think that's also holding me back from my ability to increase my financial capabilities.
Okay, got it. So a lot of it is just stemming around your relationship to money and specifically around excess, right? Like it sounds to me like I can, survive, I can get by, the minimums are always there, something always like gets
Mhm.
covered, but the having the excess like that seems to be where I'm kind of uncomfortable on some level with that particular relationship. Is that accurate for you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So when you talk about this anxiousness around money, like I won't look at a bill, I can't sleep if there's a big payment coming up, etc.
Mhm.
The first question I would have for you is what is the actual source of your financial security?
You mean like how money comes in, or the
Like
insecurity surrounding it?
when you think of financial
Mhm.
security, what is the source of it
Mm.
for you?
So it means making sure that I can clear my bills, not find myself in a debt type situation. I don't owe anybody money, and then there's also money, extra money that can accommodate things without the need to like put it on credit or some sort of borrowing circumstances.
Perfect. So if you rewound that answer, what the commonality with all of those is the source of my security when it comes to finances is money.
Mm.
Okay. So even just with that reflection, just what lands for you there is still kind of, I don't know what you're talking about. So
So I guess it comes from a lot of unsettling and just unknowing. And so if I'm the type of person who reads the last page of a book because I want to know the outcome.
Hmm.
So if I feel like I can't determine what the outcome is going to be in a life circumstance, it kind of leaves me unsettled and there's a lack of control there. And I think maybe when it comes to money specifically, it's one of those things that if you look in your bank account and you see X, you know what you can clear and what's coming down the pike and kind of do mental math and all that discernment as far as it comes, as far as, other people's actions towards you or the outcomes of certain scenarios, those are harder to predict. So I think while there is security in money, there's also, well, while there's insecurity in money, there's also a degree of security, if that makes sense.
Hmm. So even with that, right? Like I gotta flip to the last page of the book because I gotta know the outcome.
Hmm.
Okay. I get
Hmm.
unsettled if I don't know what's coming up. Basically, I need
Hmm.
control. Okay.
Hmm.
So in a bunch of different areas of your life, the part of you that cannot handle the unknown and uncertainty, the flip side of that is basically I don't trust myself to adapt to whatever is next. Because if I got to know how the book ends, that will gauge
Hmm.
how I proceed forward. Right? Like I got to know the end to know that I can take the first step. Okay. And that whole
Hmm.
question around what is the source of security? What is your source of financial security? And I reflected back to you, well, all of your answers are around money. Like either I have enough money to pay off debts, I have enough money to clear a bill, I have enough money sitting in the bank account. Like the money is more powerful and bypasses the truth, which is that you are actually the source of the money. Like the money comes from other people's bank accounts, yes, but it cannot travel into your bank account unless you do something. Like even if you won the lottery, you still have to go and be like, "Hey, here's my ticket. I won the lottery." Right? So it's like the viewing of money as this is the solution to all my problems and I also need it completely bypasses your own power to actually get it. And then the need for control of like, hey, but I need to know every single thing that's about to happen, right? It's a very anxious, scarce view of like I can't basically trust to step into anything that's remotely unclear. So when I reflect all these things back to you, what comes up?
I've thought about a lot of different things that are coming down the pike for me and my fear surrounding taking those leaps and but also knowing that if I don't take the leaps, it could curb my growth, but also makes me fearful because if I do, that could also curb my growth. Because if it's a not a smart decision, it could end up, hurting me in the long run. So I see all of the things that play out in my mind as you say that because it's not wrong.
Okay. And which parts resonate with you the most as like, okay, this is probably the most accurate?
That I'm the one who's in control ultimately. Like it's not so much the money, but it's, whatever I'm cultivating and knowing right now that I have this potential business proposition also in front of me, but totally fear based and I either pull the trigger or I don't, and what that could possibly mean because I don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Okay. And is this like a new piece of information for you, or this is also something you've like already known and I just kind of reflected it back to you?
I'm known, but I'm also, I think, kind of I've had really positive thoughts towards it in the past, but only recently is it becoming a really big source of anxiety and is there negative associations with it.
Okay. So you mentioned multiple times that like, okay, I work on my mindset quite a bit. I have a growth mindset. I've read a lot about this stuff. I
Mhm.
listen to a lot about this stuff. Okay. So do you think this is a mindset issue? for you.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Why do you think you haven't been able to crack it if you've been working so hard at it for so long?
Um, there is an inherent fear inside of me.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a constant, it's almost like having a devil and an angel on both of my shoulders. I feel like that's kind of how I walk through life a little bit. I think the angel has a lot more sway more recently in my life, but the devil tends to come into play still. He's not totally left the chat.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of it is knowing that I don't want to stay somewhere in the middle of growing and kind of being small, but also knowing that when you grow and get bigger or what have you, that opens you up to a lot of susceptibility, whether it's um, criticism from other people, um, the imposter syndrome, whether or not I deserve this. Um, those are the things that kind of come off the top of my head.
Okay. So growing and getting bigger, imposter syndrome, criticism from
Mhm.
others, not knowing whether I deserve this. Okay.
Right.
So would you clump those as mindset issues?
I think it's a blend of mindset, but also societal um, noise.
Hmm. Well, which there is discernment on what part of that you accept or not, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what I'm getting at here is like you're somebody that's obviously quite educated, you know a whole lot of things. Obviously, you've used your mind to solve a lot of problems. You've used your mind to have a lot of success. Okay, so the gift of your intellect is obviously strong and it works in your favor. Okay. The distortion of your intellect is you end up in the man with a hammer problem. So all of your problems start to look like nails, and you're trying to
Hmm.
nail screws. You're trying to, nail things that don't need any nailing. So at what point do mindset problems stop being mindset problems for you?
I guess on execution
Okay,
or lack
perfect.
thereof.
So what is the gap between knowing and execution?
Me, or my, more so, yes, more or less, yes, me, but where that's coming from specifically, I'm not really sure.
Okay, perfect. So when you don't execute versus
Mhm.
when you do execute, what's the difference in your state, like in your inner state?
I think a lot of it has to do what's really happening at that time, both to me in a personal capacity, but also in a professional one. So I often find that I kind of am on this roller coaster in life. I mean, I think most people are, but I tend to really internalize a lot of things. I find myself to be a little bit more empathic. So and some of this actually comes from my significant other who, when he's in a state that seems unstable or uncertain, he doesn't even have to be in the same room as me, but I can feel the anxiety and it can make the day feel very untethered. And it sits with me for a longer than normal amount of time, and it's really hard to separate from. So I noticed that when he's on a high, I am also on a high, and it allows for me and make kind of cosigns in a way that the decision that I'm making is the right decision. But if there is some cloudiness and fuzziness on his part, it makes me unsure of my own. And then that causes my inaction or my questions as to whether or not it's a good decision.
Got it. So Do you see how your actions are actually driven by your emotions? They're not driven by what you know.
Hmm.
Okay. So again, is that something that you're aware of that's new or not really?
Maybe somewhere in between.
Okay.
Like I'm aware of how like his emotions and other people's emotions do affect me, but I don't think it occurred to me that those also are affecting how I make decisions.
110%. Like, yes, thoughts, feelings, and actions. I always like to think of it in the model of a triangle. They're all interconnected, and we can get into
Hmm.
semantics of like which one causes which, etc. But the reality is you can affect them all through like you can take a powerful action, it'll make you feel better, make you think better thoughts. You can think
Hmm.
better thoughts, make you feel better, do a particular action, and like vice versa. So the reason why I'm getting at all of this and why I'm asking you all of these questions is again, if you rewind back what we were talking about, the majority of your answers stem around either the external is more powerful than me in some sort of way. So money, my empathy, which is basically like a lack of discernment on which emotions are mine and which are others, right? So like absorb that in
Hmm.
naturally. So like that's actually an emotional skill, okay, to
Hmm.
separate and to discern. But regardless, the external affects me and I'm powerless to it or less powerful than I actually am capable of being. Okay. And I know a lot of things and I know exactly what's wrong, but I can't translate that into action. Well, the linchpin in all of those instances is actually your emotions. All of the fears that you fear and feel are basically all of the hindrances towards your actions, right? But you can't really outthink emotions, right?
Hmm.
So the level of your intellect, the level of your understanding, the level of your awareness is up here, but the level of your either emotional acuity or capacity or ability to transmute those emotions into something that is positive actions is far below your intellectual understanding. Okay, so before I go on, like what lands with you with all that?
You're right. I just never, I when I was younger, somebody had told me how interesting it was that I was aware of my shortfall or my shortcomings, but how I was resistant to changing them. Because
Hmm.
most people go to therapy, for example, because they just don't even understand what their shortcomings are and what's affecting their ability to move forward. And so that always sat with me. It was pretty interesting because I think I was like a teenager, so I was really young. But and that always stuck with me, and I always like kind of dwelled upon it like, on occasion to think, okay, well, I want to kind of keep that awareness about me, so that I'm not ignorant to things or seemingly complacent. But for you to say, this huge discrepancy is definitely something I've never considered.
Okay. So I'm glad that that's landing for you because I think that's at the crux of
Mhm.
everything. And even we talked about like at the very beginning when I was asking you what's the source of your security? Like
Mhm.
self-trust is not an intellectual exercise.
Mhm.
Self-trust is two things. Like it is the accumulated evidence that you like say like, honor your word or that you can depend on yourself to get out of situations. Okay.
Mhm.
But that is actually generated through a feeling, depending on the situation. Sometimes that might be courage, sometimes that might be safety, sometimes that might be empowerment. Like those are the feelings that ultimately lead to the evidence that confirms like I can trust myself to move through situations. Right? But those pieces are missing when your brain defaults to being like, well, money is the source of my security. The external world, in some ways, is more powerful because it influences how I act. Right? So there is this gap in terms of that particular emotional capacity, emotional, I'll say maturity for the lack of better word, because it is something that you can build, right? So it's like you can think of it as like my
Mhm.
intellect's very mature, but my emotions are not as mature as my intellect, right? If I can match those two, it'd be a lot easier for me to show what I know. So again, just what's
Mhm.
landing with all of that?
I don't know if I've ever considered um, that I had an emotional immaturity. Um, Maybe because I've always felt like in the circumstance I found myself comparatively, I had more of a development in my emotions, especially in my partnership, despite our age difference. Also, comparing it to some of the things that like my own mother and my own father do. So I always felt like maybe I grew up a little bit too fast. Um, but yeah, I never looked at it in terms of having an emotional maturity. So that is something I just never thought about.
Yeah. And listen, it could also just be semantics because I use that particular word and you might have
Mhm.
different associations with it. So to be clear, I also have no doubt that you are very good at observing and seeing the different parts and like recognizing, oh, like this person's acting out because of,
Mhm.
XYZ, or I recognize this is the emotion within me, etc. Right? So I don't doubt
Mhm.
that capacity of yours to like observe and to have greater awareness around it, which I think is what you were alluding to. And correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm alluding to in terms of emotional maturity is more along the like, maybe you could call it like empowerment maturity, like
Okay.
to translate emotions that normally get me to shrink, and I found safety in shrinking, and translate those into actions that are more conducive with my power and that match like what I know about the world, what I want to believe, et cetera, et cetera. So like, does that
Okay.
clear it up for you, or is that still unclear?
Yes.
What lands with
No,
that?
it's still, I think it's still similar to what I interpreted initially. It's not 100%, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So when you zoom out with regards to all of this, okay, what is it that you ultimately want?
It's a good question. Um, Constantly asking myself what the end game is, and it's not exactly very clear. Um, I have things that I see in my mind for what I would like for the outcomes to be. Um, but I never, uh, it's never super clear. The idea is that I would like to achieve a degree of success, but success is such an arbitrary term and it means something different for everybody. But what success means to me is not, it's not clear.
Mhm. So if I reflect that back to you, what I want is unclear, and a part of me knows that what I have here is not what I want.
Mhm.
Okay. The easiest person to lie to is always going to be ourselves. Okay. And this is why, we always need somebody from the outside to kind of reflect things back. So
Mhm.
if a part of me knows I don't want what's here, but I also don't really have a clear idea of where I want to go, that is a beautiful recipe to continue to stay the same.
Mhm.
So when I reflect that back, what lands for you there?
You're right. And it's not something I haven't thought about before. Um, I find that when I do more visualization exercises, that things become more apparent. Comfort is derived, some sort of clarity. Um, Things seem to come together a lot better. But then when I kind of get caught up and I don't do those activities or visualizations and things of that nature, that's when things seem to get really fuzzy. It's almost like I'm able to bring in things for a temporary period of time because I've put in the effort to achieve them.
Mm-hmm.
And then once those things have been called in, I don't have time to work on that anymore. And then they kind of sizzle out.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where that lack of clarity and and just like visualization and I guess even comfortable, like a comfortable place kind of fall out. And then when I try to kind of talk myself back into doing these things, then I realize how caught up I am in the really tedious tasks that I hate doing anyway, and I just don't have time for it. And then it all feels exhausting. And like I know that I should be doing the things that work, more of that and less of the things that don't, but I still have to do the stupid things I feel like aren't really moving the needle because it's part of my day to day for my business. And that's what's really hard to kind of
Mm-hmm.
get out of.
And it's also very reflective of somebody that has beliefs rooted in I need to control.
I mean, that's without saying, right?
Right. Well, without saying yes, but it's also extremely relevant, right? I need to
Yeah.
know the outcome. I need to make sure that everything's checked off. I need to know what the end game is before I can even take the first steps. That means I need to control everything. I
Mhm.
need to see that every piece is checked off because if it's not, then like certain bad things are going to happen, right? Like
Yeah.
that narrative is one that perpetuates the belief that I need to actually control, right? So again, we're getting back
Mhm.
into what I fear is my adaptability at the unknown. What I fear is surrender. What I fear subconsciously is letting go and moving into things that are easier, moving into areas that are more expansive but different than where I'm at right
Mhm.
now. So again, what lands with all of that?
So it reminds me of a current dilemma that I'm experiencing. One of which is I the tasks that I'm mentioning to you, and I are that I've been taking on more of an administrative components within my business. So I'm not just the talent, if you will. I don't just see patients, but I also do a lot. I mean, I've always done back end things, but when my virtual assistant when we parted ways about 2 or 3 months ago, I took it on and chose not to hire somebody else because I realized that tasks were not getting done that were supposed to. I felt very resentful toward the amount of money that I paid her and the fairness and that I gave to her, and that it was kind of thrown back in my face. And I'm holding back from hiring somebody else, but I'm also doing the things that I don't want to do and I don't think really move the needle forward. And so I think that's probably where I'm deriving some of this stuckness from too.
Mhm. And to be fair, like delegation is a skill that can
Mhm.
have a lot of negative effects if it's not implemented correctly. So
Mhm.
I'm not at all downplaying that because it's such a common thing, especially when you're kind of hiring your first people. So even
Mhm.
if you look at that situation with your admin, were there instances where you were seeing, behaviors or things weren't done on deadline or the quality of work wasn't there that you kind of turned a blind eye to or painted, or red flags green? Like, were there instances of stuff like that happening while she was under employment with you?
So initially, I felt like I probably wasn't delegating enough because I did want to make sure that it was getting done correctly. And then I got to a point where I was getting overwhelmed just in general. The business got busier, things were changing, the landscape was becoming very different. So I was giving her more things to do. But in order for me to make sure that they were getting done, I tried to automate certain things, create task, applications and software that made sense to be able to track everything. I'm really big on efficiency, so frequently I would have her audit her time just to make sure we were spending time on the things that really made move that did impact us greatly, and that try to figure out, and then that way I could try to figure out a way to kind of abate the things that were time sucking but not really generating any outcomes. And that's always my basis, because I don't want to do the same things over and over again. So I'm constantly trying to do the audits. And also we're not even 4 years old, so the changes that are going to happen during this time frame are going to be probably great and frequent, because I'm also trying to figure out what works for me. And I know that, having worked in customer service before opening my own business, that like you don't get paid if my customers aren't happy. So it's a full experience from the time you get on the phone to the time you leave my office for an appointment, and that's really important to me. And so while I don't think I was knowingly turning a blind eye, I think I just started giving her more things, assuming they were getting done and not really checking in on them.
Okay. So I mean, now it's kind of a bunch of different things. So part of it
Hmm.
is like I'm delegating things that aren't actually reliable, meaning like I'm
Hmm.
delegating an outcome, but we're not 100% sure what the process is, or I'm actually delegating a process, but I'm not really sure
Hmm.
100% what the success criteria of when it's completed and this is the quality. So it's like basically a lot of people, when like especially entrepreneurs, like when they get busy, like we'll outsource responsibility without recognizing that the responsibility is on us to both have a reliable process and reliable success criteria that is then repeatable, and then we can actually properly give corrective feedback, right? So that's kind of
Right.
the whole idea of like rushing into it, right? Is one, and then two, it's like trying to build the plane while you're falling, right? Like I'm also doing that while we're also changing a bunch of different things, we're growing, etc., right?
Hmm.
And in the mix of all of that, I'm also not getting in the weeds and doing that corrective action. I'm turning a blind eye to certain things. So it's like the perfect recipe for the resentment that is to
And,
come, right? Part
hmm.
circumstantial, part you, part time, but like that's the end result. So
Hmm.
before I go on, like, is that accurate as far as what your experience of that was?
Yes, and I acknowledge that, those were the things, like you just said, were very likely when you are starting something and you don't really have the processes in place, because you don't really know what the process entails yet, or what entails a process. But that was kind of why because I was doing everything before I took her on. And when I realized that I just couldn't do all those things anymore, I did try to document my processes. But then it also occurred to me that I don't think the same way everyone else does. So what seemed obvious to me was not obvious to other people. And but at the same time, I also gave an opportunity. We met weekly, those types of things. So then it's like, was it too much? Was it not enough? I would check in, see how things were going, where the hiccups, what, and it was always the same answer: was it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And I don't really know how to pull out more information outside of that. And so yeah, then it got to a place where I was like, all right, well, I guess everything's fine. So
Right. And I know
there's
that
no
that
issue.
is a tough one. And like we're getting into more like
Mhm.
tactical things with regards to like
Yeah.
managing a team, but like the reality
Right.
situation that's more of like, yes, the obvious is not obvious, which is also why
Mhm.
part of what makes delegation and systematizing at the level where it's like me building a small team, what makes that hard is like part of your job is actually figuring out how you think about things. How to make decisions. Why
Mhm.
is this a no? Why is this a yes? Right. And that also needs to be articulated in the actual process. But again, it's one of those things you learn either if it's a mistake or if somebody can show you like ahead of time. So I think that's more in the skill development of actually delegating, right? Which I know is kind of
Mhm.
moving into a different direction than we kind of initially got to here, and like that's okay. Um, but I think the more important part to kind of bring it back to what triggered this initial tangent was like if inherently right now part of your identity is one where like it's rooted in beliefs that I need to control, right? And you've had experiences where not like you didn't get the outcome that you wanted as soon as you let go of control. Okay.
Mhm.
It's very easy to take a skill gap in what you were trying to do and make that mean and like confirm the actual limiting belief, which is I need control. Okay. And that's kind of part of the surrender. It's like recognizing, well, yes, I can make mistakes. Yes, this is a new skill. And if the limiting belief of like I need control is still limiting me and it's still creating all of this anxiety, then it's like, okay, then that is actually the limiter to a big part of my expansion and getting out of the weeds of the day to day. So again, what lands for you with all of that?
Uh, I think the fact that I am aware of the control that I so desire and feel like I need. And I felt like my me relinquishing control was in that specific circumstance, trying to kind of just give her things to and assuming they were getting done, and that that was me not being a micromanager and all that that was me trying to relinquish my control. But then also realizing how while I was doing that, I was also being anxious behind the scenes about whether or not it was getting done, but just not following up on it. And I have also noticed since then, and kind of taking a lot of those jobs over, I have felt less anxious in this realm, which is why I think it makes me so afraid to then bring somebody else in to do this job again. Because, I mean, just in my overall stress levels, I track things through my wearable device and I just see like stress is coming down immensely. My heart rate is healthier. I'm not operating on like these fumes. My sleep is better. All these things I've seen that have maybe not an exact direct correlation to it, but I definitely see that I'm not anxious about whether or not the work's getting done anymore.
110%. And that really is the choice in front of you, right? Because
Mhm.
again, if you so the way that I define identity, and it's kind of a core part of how I coach. So my working definition of identity is basically anything you think, feel, and act. Okay, that's
Mhm.
reflective of essentially who you are and what your identity is. So if your identity is rooted in beliefs of like I need to control,
Mhm.
110 million%, you're going to feel a lot less stress when you are in control. Like this is why you read the
Mhm.
last page first, because that
Mhm.
actually alleviates the inner anxiety of just reading the first page first, right?
Mhm.
So we are never going to work outside of our beliefs and our paradigms. So think of this in a different way. If I asked you, are you a thief? Like, what is your answer?
No.
No. Okay. Do you have trouble not stealing things?
No.
Do you have to do affirmations or meditations to like not steal things?
No.
No. Right. Because not being a thief and not stealing is simply a reflection of who you are. You think, feel, and act in
Mhm.
alignment with like never stealing. Like, I'm an honest person. This is not even a thing. Yet,
Mhm.
as soon as I try to let go of control, as soon as I try to have less anxiety about money, as soon as I try to do bigger things and get out there more, now I like bust out this toolkit of like affirmations and meditations and journaling, and I'm not against any
Mhm.
of that. The point here that I'm
Mhm.
trying to make is like all of those things that are required for the next level of your business require a jump away from the identity that you have now. Because if you had the identity
Mhm.
that you had now that's aligned with all of that, it would be as non-consequential as me asking you, like, are you a thief? You're like, what are you talking about? It's a stupid question. Because that's essentially
Mhm.
who you are, right? So now
Right.
going back to the lack of control thing, right? When it's in your identity to need that control, to need to know what the next two steps are, to need to know that the outcome is safe, of course it's going to be relieving as soon as you take that control back, right? And
Mhm.
that's kind of where the fork in the road is for you. It's like the next iteration of your business requires a level of leadership where you have to delegate. Like
Mhm.
we don't have to get into specific of numbers, but like whatever, like clearly if you're overworked right now, or if you're doing the majority of your work is like low level work that could be done by somebody else,
Mhm.
The price of admission for that is either I force myself against my current identity and will my way through doing and outputting more to like get it all done, or I hire somebody and still will myself away from these beliefs and away from this identity and go through the anxiety to like get it all done through somebody else. Okay. Or I recognize that, okay, if I upgrade how I think, feel, and act by stopping and healing the past so that it stops sabotaging my present, getting better and navigating my emotions and transmuting them into the actions that I know I need to do, and actually doing the work to embody the beliefs that are going to align with the leadership that I need to go to the next level, then hiring somebody, going through the skill development to actually get them to be a reliable employee, like then that becomes how you nurture who the next iteration of your leadership needs to be to take the business to that level, right? So it's basically it's like it's a price of admission type of question. So I know that was a lot of different
Mhm.
things thrown your way. Again, what's landing, what isn't?
You're absolutely right. I think that that's probably also where a degree of the anxiety comes from, is that I know that. But at the same time, I'm having a really hard time even just drafting a job description, to even just put it online, to even just see what I get. I think I just have it so ingrained in my mind that I'm not going to find the person that I'm looking for. And what's the point? And, but also understanding that, yeah, I can't keep doing these things in order to achieve something else. That's, I guess, one of the visions that I see when I see things for my future. And I just don't know where to go from there.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of that idea of in order to get something of a higher nature, you have to give up something of a lower nature,
Hmm.
right?
They can't really coexist because there's just not enough to go around.
Correct. It's kind of like I need whatever, 5 to 10 hours a week to just sit and be able to think strategically about the business and make strategic decisions. But I don't have those 5 to 10 hours because I'm done doing administrative work that a part of me is unwilling to let go of. Okay, so I have to give up the lower nature things. And now we're getting into like very specifics, but the lower nature things is the administrative work. Okay,
Hmm.
in order to have something of a higher nature, which is, who I am as a leader and being able to think strategically. The gap between those two is what I call the turbulence of resistance. So if you think of a plane, how it goes up into the atmosphere, it's literally impossible for a plane not to experience some level of turbulence when it goes through the air. Like it's like the physics of it mean it has to go through turbulence until it gets to this comfortable new normal where it's like cruising at altitude. Okay. That turbulence level is basically everything that we've kind of highlighted today, right? So it will be turbulent for you to heal your
Hmm.
past, so stop sabotaging your present. It will be turbulent to step into your empowerment and let go of the fears. It will be turbulent to embody that inside of your business. It will be turbulent to write that description. It will be turbulent to like hire that person, onboard them, train them, help them grow. Because there's a skill aspect to all of that for both you and who you hire. And each level of that's going to trigger something inside of you. Right. So it's kind of like
Hmm.
that turbulence, that's the price of admission in order to go to the next level. Right. Now, for many, like the next level is worth it, but it's like that's what you're looking at. And obviously the ride can be a lot smoother when you get rid of the 50%, what I call like separating the drama from the data. So like the data is all the
Mm.
objective things you have to do that. Like you got to write the job description, you have to hire the person, you have to onboard them, you have to create the processes, you have to check in with, like you got to do all of those things.
Hmm.
But that's the objective stuff.
Hmm.
But when we can't separate our drama into that, now you're like adding, a 50-pound pack to everywhere where you go. Right. So that's the drama of like, well, I can't let go of control. this mistake happened. It also means that I need to do it myself. I can't sleep because I don't
Hmm.
know how they're gonna output. You know, like that's the drama that really, once you heal, you eliminate that. It doesn't excuse the fact that you still have to learn the objective skills, but it becomes a lot easier and a lot more fun, a lot more peaceful to actually do that portion of it. So again, I know I'm talking a lot at you, but what's landing? What is it, etc.
I, yeah, I mean, I have anxiety just thinking about it. And the reality is like I wouldn't consider myself like a super obviously anxious person, but I do feel it. And so it's always interesting because there's just a position where people are, when I tell people that, they say, hey, like you could have fooled me type of a thing. And so I just, and so then it's hard for me to even read what is actually maybe sometimes giving me more anxiety than I think it is. But like, as we're talking about this, like, yeah, like I just thought about all the tedious tasks that I do that because I'm obviously not going to outsource everything because I don't have the funds to do it right off the jump, but it's a matter of discerning gets what can I delegate to this one person who's supposed to handle like administrative tasks, and it's like, all right, what about the marketing, and then what about, you know, uh, do I explore employee benefits, and do I do all these other extra things, and what comes with that, and then best of all is how do I pay for it all.
Yeah, that is a problem that's solvable. It's not an easy problem, it's not a fun problem, but it is a problem that's solvable. I think it's kind of like the first invitation for you is like, do you want to go and solve that problem before you develop the emotional capacity to like deal with it in a more peaceful way, or do you want to solve it with all of the anxiety? I think that's the real
Mm-hmm.
question you gotta decide because you're gonna need to do both. And it's just a matter of like
Mm-hmm.
when you do both. And many times when I work with clients, it's after they've blown themselves up trying to do it the latter. So you do have an advantage because what's in front of you is like, well, without going through the rigmarole of actually hiring and dealing with people, there is an opportunity to work on my identity and be more at peace with all of these things and heal in me all of these unnecessary needs and fears, and then go and hire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you can then jump in deep end and kind of do both. I wouldn't recommend it because there's a lot of stuff at play, especially if you're saying like, okay, I'm on a budget, but that is kind of what's in front of you. So again, what lands for you with all that?
um I feel like I'm trying to heal it, but also I think by the fact that I do feel so much calmer about having the control, it's just making it that much harder to do it. And also, there could be this false sense of security that I'm supplying myself because of that comfort I'm achieving by that control aspect. So then it leads me to believe that um, I am healing, but then when we talk, it's like, no, I'm probably not. So do I take a leap and actually is the healing in the process of doing the thing that I thought was giving me anxiety, but also then allows me a sense of comfort by not having gotten a person to take over those tasks. So I feel like I'm in this like Chinese finger trap right now, and I don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, totally fair and a great observation as well. So here's what I would reflect back to you. So number one, so we said it like near the beginning, like the nature of your problem isn't actually intellectual, it's emotional. So
Mm-hmm.
the bypassing that you're describing of like, well, when I do regain control, I do feel relief, etc. Is it like essentially bypassing? Yes, because the more you learn, the less that actually solves the problem. Like you lack the
Mm,
skill set what we talked about at the beginning, which is how do I manage my emotions through this? How do I
mhm,
transcend the fear? How do I heal the parts of my past that don't make it safe for me to, let go and do all of those things? Those are all
mhm,
emotional problems that have emotional solutions, but you're not going to find them
mhm,
listening to a podcast. Okay.
mhm,
So that's number one. Then number two, with regards to that whole thing of like, okay, well, which goes first? Do I hire a team, etc. It's kind of like hiring the team and doing all of those things. It will trigger all of the places where you are not free. Okay. So
mhm,
like one of the fillers I was using in my coaching is like you can't be triggered if you're not loaded. So what
mhm,
doing the hiring will reveal is where you are loaded. And that is a normal part of, in my opinion, running a business. Because as I always say, it's like if you want to do real personal development, have a kid, get into a conscious relationship, or start a business. All of those things will reveal where you are loaded because they require a different level of you in order to do them effectively. So it's like the
mhm,
vehicle of the business will reveal to you where you are still not free, where you still have these patterns of your identity that are keeping you locked in. Now, that's what I was saying before. It's like you don't have to jump into the deep end to begin to heal all those because there's a lot of things, even just from this conversation, that are already obvious. And because you have some past tries at it, like you can do a lot of these things retroactively. That's what I was
mhm,
saying. It's like, do you want to go into doing the hiring with a higher capacity to handle the emotions of it because you've healed a lot of it, or do you want to do both at once? So that is how I would look at that question. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's like, well, it's the answer that you want, right? So again,
mhm.
what lands with that?
I think it's I I don't have an answer. I think both of them are plausible outcomes for me, unfortunately, and I'm not really sure what. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, right? That comes back to me not like having been able to read the last page of this story, and I'm just that's where I'm really stuck, and I don't know. I did consider, I had lunch the other day with a friend who was talking to me about her virtual assistants and the platforms that she went through, and I was like, all right, maybe that's my happy medium, like not maybe hiring somebody in person. But then it also provides to me a certain level of inadequacy and my what it is I'm offering this person or anybody that comes into my office to work with me, work for me, is am I giving them value in being here? Am I giving them purpose? Am I a fraud? Like, who am I and who am I to be able to give to anybody anything? And am I over promising? Am I under delivering? And then, and then I'm tainted and feel like I'm a charlatan because I found that I've given to people in the past the things that I felt like I would have loved to have been given, whether it's directional, motivational, intellectual, and then it's kind of been thrown back in my face. So then I pull back and I don't want to even offer that anymore. But then it comes back to I need to because I feel like I need to generate value for this person to for them to want to be here. And that's I think where that it's both inadequacy but also it's a whole circular thing, and ultimately coming down to my sense of inadequacy just in general and not being comfortable in what it is I feel like I can provide or supply for people.
Yeah. So welcome to another layer of the onion to in this instance rooted in imposter syndrome, and that one is going to be relevant across the board. The sense of
Mhm.
inadequacy, that's going to seep into everything we talked about today. Part of the reason you need
Yeah.
control is because it actually buffers and protects from the inadequacy being shown outward, at least subconsciously. That is generally how those patterns work. Because if I can control the pieces, if I know the end, then I know whether it's safe to step here and I'll never be exposed, right? Like my shame will never be triggered,
Mhm.
right? So that's just
Mhm.
one small example of like how those patterns will manifest. But yeah, it's like I want to be conscious of time, and at the end, as much as
Mhm.
I wish I could solve all these problems for you in one coaching session, unfortunately I can't. But in
Mhm.
terms of just like having deeper awareness around the limiting patterns that are holding you back right now, like does this feel like you've gotten deeper awareness around those pieces? Is there still something left outstanding? Like where are you at with that?
No, I think if I wasn't aware of them before, was somewhat aware of them, I'm more aware of them now and how they're translating into other aspects. Um, Also understanding, you know, there's again the devil and the angel thing and trying to figure out where I can fall in between because I think that there's also part of me that tries to justify things. I know a lot of people are guilty of that, but I try to justify them in a way. For example, then adequacy and all that, I justify as maintaining a degree of humility because I don't think, especially in my field, that I can't know everything, and I think that's okay because if I did, then then the world's problems would be solved. No one would be sick. No one would be this. No one would be that. Right. And so obviously I don't, and those things aren't true. Um, so if I don't know, if I walked around like I knew everything or didn't have a degree of inadequacy, that I wouldn't be humble. And could I really be a decent person for it? Um, so I think that there's a lot. I mean, that's the thing, right? There's a lot of inner stuff that I really do need to work on. Uh, I create more awareness around the things that I don't know, do I focus more on it or less on it and where that should go? Because sometimes I think I give the things that don't really need a lot of attention the same amount of attention as the things that really do deserve it so that there's some degree of homogeneity for fairness and trying maybe to refocus my efforts on the things that truly need the effort and to kind of let the things that are trivial really just fall by the wayside and or just not be given that much attention.
Yeah, and that discernment is a leadership quality, really. How do I focus on the things that
Mm,
actually move the needle forward? That's
yeah.
part of this broader discussion. And I want to move us to a close, but just quickly, even with the whole humility thing, like that's just another limiting belief spewing out a very justifiable lie because humbleness in its purest, undistorted form is just contact with reality. I thought this was the way this was. Oh, and then this happened. So I got humbled and I actually have a better contact with reality. Like that's actually humbleness in its purest form. The distorted form is how we talk about it now, which is basically just this mask for unworthiness. Oh, let me humble myself because I don't know anything. So like that sounds like it sounds a lot better to be humble than like I actually feel inadequate, right? So it's just this mask that our own unworthiness tends to wear because it sounds a lot better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's a whole other tangent we can get into, but just in terms of like kind of breaking this down for you and kind of mapping out, the gap between where you are and where you want to go. Is that clear for you from this conversation? Or again, is there something that's outstanding?
Probably more clear. Like you said, we're not going to solve everything in this one session, but I think, yeah, I think more clarity has been revealed, allowing for maybe just a more solid direction instead of all the arrows going in all the directions. 'Cause that's like my brain does that too, and then it's really hard to get tasks done, right? Because if you're trying to tackle everything at once. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So good. I'm glad to hear that is kind of settling for you. So why don't you move us to a close and let everybody know, where to find you, who's the best person to find you. Floor is yours for that.
So you can find me through my website, soleilholistic.com. I am also on Instagram, both on a personal page, Dr. Lyndsey, or at Soleil Holistic, which is our business. Um, and yeah, that's where you can find me.
Okay, awesome. Well, as always, we'll include that in the show notes. But Lyndsey, thank you very much for being on and allowing yourself to be witnessed in this way. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.